Okay, I think we are
Yes,
live.
you seem to be live.
We're live. So,
Alive.
hi everyone, welcome to Quick Connect Live. This is a place where we share, learn, and grow together as a community. We meet fortnightly to discuss personal development topics ranging from psychometric tools to psychological methods to performance hacks. It is hosted by me, Jeff and Ethan. And for today, we're covering the topic of identifying your interferences. That's kind of a follow-up from last session where we talked about bringing more out of you. So for today, I will be your host. Jeff will be your scribe. He'll be on Miroboard and putting everything together. And Ethan will be your facilitator for today. So maybe just a quick round of introduction. I'll go first and then have everyone to just kind of share. Let's say what should get. Okay, so maybe the last one we talk about what brings the best of us, right? So maybe we can get everyone to share your name, what you do, and what do you feel gets in the way for you to bring your best, right? So maybe that would be a good way.
Identifying your interferences.
Yeah, so describing it will be kind of like what gets in the way for you to bring your best, right? So
but you're supposed to help us to identify the interference.
No.
Today.
You can start with your version of it first.
Yeah.
What you think gets in your way, then we can go further.
And then we can go deeper, right? We can talk about it. Okay, so as a way of introduction, my name is Alex. I help people to discover, decipher, and develop their talents into strengths so that they can maximize their performance at work, improve relationships, and increase overall well-being. So I represent Strengths Alchemy. We provide coaching, training, and facilitation services for people if they want to improve themselves or even identify what career they want. So for me, my interference to bringing my best is people who flip-flop. Okay, so well, I mean, just there are several things that prevents me from bringing my best, right? One of which is if I work with a team or a leader who tends to flip-flop on direction, that makes it really, really hard for me to bring my best, right? So that's kind of what interferes for me. So I'm gonna just move around and let's jump around, right? Faith, why don't you share your name, what you do, and what you see as interferences for you?
I'm Faith. I actually work on evaluating internet-related products and onboard it into company's portfolio, along with doing internal process stuff. What do I feel get in the way of self-improving? I think sometimes it's really about, some people 你看到了你就会反感. So it's like they just flip the knot in you.
For those who don't really understand Mandarin, the moment you see she sees them, she feels irritated already.
Yeah. So it's like the hostile feeling will just come up for certain people, and then
they will naturally trigger you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's like very, very obvious one. Anyway, yes. Let's go next. Jeffrey.
Is it my turn? Oh, okay. I'm Jeffeth. Magical statement. Okay, I help leaders to be more self-aware and also understand their leadership impact on others. I'm a civil servant and I represent the civil service in designing leadership milestone programs. I also represent myself, right? So I don't own any company, but
But you support Alex when his Strengths Alchemy course.
Yeah, definitely support Alex in his Strengths Alchemy. And similar to him, help coach other people, right, for their own personal well-being and being the best that they can be.
Cool. He's also a imagenetics coach.
Yes.
Yeah. So interference-wise, I suppose mainly around self-doubt, especially in areas where I'm unfamiliar with. Self-doubt tends to be more intense.
Right.
So that came out for me more.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll pass on to Melson.
Hi, thanks for having me and having this session. My name is Nelson. So I'm working in a financial institution right now. Did a couple of career pivots in my life. I'm still quite young though, just to try different things and experiment different functions and fields. I guess one of the issues I always face in terms of preventing how I can really be the first class version of myself is that, people always, before they meet you, they always have a preconceived notions of how someone should be like. And I feel that these preconceived notions, whether it's like explicitly shared or implicitly held, these notions actually prevent someone from being the truest sense of themselves. So let's say, for example, if you're a lawyer, they think that you're bad in numbers, and automatically they will pigeonhole you to the more qualitative aspects of things already. And if you are, like, let's say you're a mathematician, right, they'll always by default put you to the numerical parts of things rather than letting you have the ability to function both equally. So that's why I feel, these preconceived notions, people implicitly or explicitly express through their words and actions actually do limit how someone can function.
Okay. So kind of preconceived notions, a little bit stereotyping, I'm hearing as well.
Yes, it's a little bit stereotyping, and I mean there might be some truism in that. But I guess there's always exceptions, and sometimes these kind of things may be efficient but not necessarily helpful in some ways.
Okay. Thanks, Wilson. Pick the next person to introduce him or herself. Okay. I'll pick. Justin, go next.
Hi. Yeah, I'm currently still a student. Yeah, but I'm kind of pursuing my ICF coaching accreditation this year as well.
Nice.
Yeah. Is there any other question that I need to answer?
What interferes you from bringing your best out?
Wow. I think for me, it's most probably my own self-doubt. Yeah. So probably like putting barriers in front of myself, which may not be actual barriers are there. Yeah.
So self-doubt and kind of like perceived barriers. Okay, cool. Justin, pick one more person to go next.
That's Melissa.
Yep. Melissa.
Hi, Melissa.
You're
You
still
are
muted.
still on mute. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I'm from a legal background. I work in the telco industry. An interference, right? An
Yeah.
interference that I often experience would be imposter syndrome, like giving myself less credit than I'm really due. Yeah.
Cool.
Or kind of like thinking that you're not good enough for that role or what you're telling other people you're doing, right? Okay.
Yeah. And also maybe giving myself less credit than I really do, and like just imposing hurdles. I mean, like self-imposed hurdles. Yeah. Like before I even start to undertake the task that I've been assigned to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank
Let's
you.
go to Ellie before we go back to Ethan. So Ellie, quick introduction, yourself, your name, what you do, and what interferes, prevents you from bringing the best out of yourself. You're still muted.
Oh, sorry. I double unmuted you. Sorry. Yeah.
No worries. Hi, Alex and Jeffrey, long time no see. Yeah, it's been a while. So about myself, should I start with my top 5 first?
Sure.
Okay, so my top 5, sorry, I don't have that fancy background behind like you guys. So first one is connectedness. Second is relator and activator, restorative and empathy. So currently I work as a logistics specialist in an industrial 3D printing company that's based in Germany. So there's a lot of turning point for the last coming 3 years for me, at least I would say. And I'm currently start to managing people as a understudy. Of course, in terms of interference, people were questioning things like, why do I ask so much? Because of my first thing, which I would like to connect how I connect with people and what does their background has to do with what I'm asking, so I know who am I dealing with and how do I manage day-to-day activities and delegate problems or issues that can be related to customs, because it's more on government when you don't play around with them. And the processes is quite important for us in order to do to be smooth as possible. And so it will be more on the activator that I am using all the time. And of course, back to the restorative, because every day I'm dealing with same shit, different day kind of problem. But it can be quite disruptive when it comes to customer satisfaction, especially when their cargo is on delay and I have to be very choppy on the dot to release their stuff as soon as possible to deal with the customs people. And also empathy, because I'm dealing with people, and it's not just Singapore, and with people around the APAC region, and I have to be empathetic towards their situation most of the time. Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting. Very interesting.
That's a nutshell of my current. Yeah.
Very cool.
Okay, let's just. I'll spend a little bit more time on Ellie's description, because some of you might be new to the whole Clifton Strengths tool thing, right? So Ellie I've known Ellie for a long time. She's part of our SALT program. And so she has very in-depth understanding of her talent teams. So interestingly for her, what she just did was to describe how each and every one of her talent teams could represent a barrier or interference to how she could bring her best, right? In a short summary, right? She's just broken it down by talent team. But so if I were to kind of condense it for everyone here, that's one of the source of interferences of how our talent teams could potentially also cause interferences for us bringing our best. So thanks Ellie. And I will pass it over to Ethan. Your introduction, what is your interference, and then off we go.
Hi, I'm Ethan. So I'm right now. So Nelson, don't worry about too many career switches. I literally just switched over to cybersecurity in this year. Before that, I was running a bunch of different types of businesses. Alex knows that very well. He's always complaining that I always change my brand. But I think for me, this is most likely for the next 2-3 years, because my interest has always been developing ecosystems and cultures in company. And I kind of like, it doesn't matter what I do, I'm always doing the same thing. It's just in which different areas. My last project was the Office Matters, where I was trying to help people solve office politics, only to realize that people don't even touch that word, right? So that's where the marketing failed. But part of this thing is that once you go into cybersecurity, you start realizing that you are getting past culture and politics and everything, because everybody believes that, no, I don't need cybersecurity, and then they get breached, and then they'll complain later on. So this is where why I really enjoy this industry as well. So what I do is I train and place people as well as do cyber awareness. So if you have anything about cybersecurity you want to ask, feel free to ask me. I'm in touch with a lot of the experts in the field. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. And yeah, that's it for that. And then my interference, interestingly, is ironic, because my self-assurance is my biggest interference.
For yourself or for other people?
Myself. So my self-assurance is my biggest interference, in the sense that what happens is that whenever people used to be nice to me, what happened was that I would be too nice to them afterwards in a self-assurance form, like I can help them fix their problems, no worries, I can give it back to them, I'll be grateful, I'll be whatever, no matter how much my alarm bells are ringing. So that's me most of my life. And I'm learning to undo the interference of interfering with my own alarm bells, which is the biggest thing, right? Like, so self-assurance.
Restorative in your top 10.
No, my restorative is nowhere near. The and this has to do with my Enneagram 2. I'm not sure about my Strengths Finder because it might be the individualization actually at play. Because I start individualizing too much that this person is okay. And then my strategic and ideation goes, this is where the person can be. And then it gets me confused as to not look at the reality. So that's actually one of the major things there. Because I keep on thinking about doing the next thing or helping the person or whatever, it interferes with me the most. Actually, that's my biggest interference, myself, right? Where I interfere with my own alarm bells.
So it's like second guessing yourself?
Second guessing my own second guessing of what I'm doing.
Okay,
So
we will unpack that later.
Sometimes when you second guess something, right, there's a reason why you second guess the thing. Okay, are you going to listen to that? Are you going to understand why? So what some people do is they second guess too much to begin with, so they'll never do anything. I will do the double second guess, which then I'll overdo. It comes to my self-assurance and individualization, I think. So that's the interesting, that's why I'm so weird also. But that's also the reason why my character came out to be the way it is. Because I used to overdo and overcompensate for every single thing I felt a little bit guilty about. Right? So anytime I felt alarm bells, I felt guilty for the alarm bells, so I overdo everything. So that's my biggest interference. But that being said, this is where we talk about how do you identify interferences. So I think one of the most interesting thing about this is, if you notice how different people talked about interferences. So that one of my favorite ways of looking at this is, are you looking at an external locus of control or internal locus of control when you're talking about interferences?
Yep.
So straight off the bat, yeah.
Some of us were, so for example, mine was, when my leader or my boss flip-flops, right? Or a team leader flip-flops, so that's external.
Yes.
A good number of us had things like self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and questioning yourself. So these are all internal locus. I think for at least one is a little bit of both, right?
Yeah.
We should express all five. So some of them express more internally, some of them express more externally. For Melvin's, for Nelson, sorry. So for Nelson's, I can't remember what your interference was. What was it again? The stereotyping, right?
Yeah, when people have preconceived notions.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would be external as well, right? Because it's how
other people perceive
you. Or it could also be your own perception of other people. Which is it?
Well, it could work both ways for me. Sometimes they preconceive something, and then to circumvent it or work around that, I got to say something else, right? So as to push these thoughts away. So you are preempting what they are thinking, which mostly are sometimes most of the time they are right, usually right. The intuition, and then you spend more time trying to overcome their mental hurdle. So rather than being focused on a topic itself, you spend time trying to break down their biases.
Right. Okay. I hear you.
Interesting.
So it's a little bit of both for Melton, right? Both sides. Yeah. Okay. So Ethan, sorry. Before we move on a little bit, I was thinking maybe we give a little bit of context to those who are joining us today for the first time.
Yes.
How we got to interference.
Let's go back to Jeffeth.
Okay.
Short.
Okay, so it's based on last week, 2 weeks ago, the topic, right? So we introduced a model on performance. Those of you who have joined us 2 weeks ago, we actually talked a bit more about performance, and it was based on Timothy Galloway's model of performance. He is a sports coach, and his equation that he gave was performance equals to potential minus interference. So that started off the conversation, right? So we talk a lot about potential because it's about building capabilities, building skills. We also talk a bit about recognizing your own talent teams and what to then develop further. Then after that, we also mentioned that, a lot of us, when we were coached or we were told about the good things, we know what skills to develop because many of our people around us would have told us anyway. But more often than not, we do not focus on the interference that actually stops us from performing, right? So we also cover a number different types of interference. I can't remember what I covered, but we can talk.
We can go back to the old mirror actually.
Yeah.
Do you have the old mural?
Of course, the person who owns the board should have the mural.
I know all of us have mural, but it's okay. I will bring it out. Give me a sec. Give me a sec.
But, so I think it's great because if you look at the difference is half full, I mean, glass is full and then interference. The other one, which is talent plus knowledge, which is either you have it or you don't, and then plus times knowledge, right? Which is a very different way of looking at things. Capacity and knowledge, right? Yeah, which also relates back to talent.
So briefly, this is the board.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of things covered here, but I just want you to pay attention to. So what are the type of interference? We talk about pressure. So you look at the bottom left, that whole chunk around pressure. One of the key things that came out is sometimes when people give us tasks to do, right, we feel stressed about it. But when we start to focus on the pressure than the actual task to do, that's where the interference comes in. Naturally, a lot of us will bounce back the moment we got something given to us to do. We usually focus on the task, but then where it becomes a bit unhealthy is we will start to ruminate on the task rather than doing the task.
The difficulty of the task or the inability to complete the task or something wrong with the task,
or having self-doubt about the task, right? So
I shouldn't be self-doubting.
Yeah. The other types of pressure we talk a lot is about self-consciousness. Okay. So under the inner self.
Up above.
Yeah.
Self-consciousness.
Yes. So you look at it, interference, we talk about self-consciousness. So self-consciousness could come in the form of negative self-talk, right? You sometimes may not be aware you're having a dialogue with yourself. And that itself is a sort of negative reframing. So you feel bad about it. And what we also talked a bit about, alluded to, was the shadows. That was a topic covered by Ethan. And the shadow usually are the self of you that gets really edgy or gets really insecure. Or we talk about it, some of you have just talked about negative triggers, right?
Yep.
So when you have negative trigger, that's usually where the shadow comes out. Because those are habitual thinking where you feel very uncomfortable. So that came out, and usually when it comes out, it interferes with your performance. And the last one is self-doubt. I think some of us raised this today. Especially when you start to talk to yourself, you start to hear conversations where you beat yourself up. Yeah, that's also a form of interference. Okay, so that's in summary.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Thanks, Joseph. Did a much better job than I could. So that's kind of how we started. We talked about performance equals to potential minus interferences. We talked about quite a bit about performance last round, and then we're going to deep dive into interference. So now what Ethan has brought up is that, look, interference could have an internal locus of control or an external locus of control, right? So that's kind of where we kind of had the interim description of what happened last round. So Ethan, back to you.
Okay, great. So if you notice, right, we all have a tendency to fix towards a single point of the interference. Like we have a tendency to, not everybody would, not all the time, but we have a tendency to fixate on a certain way the interference is happening. So meaning, right, people who flip-flop, right? For example, then it doesn't talk about your reaction to people who flip-flop, and therefore your interference with yourself when you're dealing with people who flip-flop.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So the person can interfere with the thought patterns because the person is indecisive, right? Basically changing between different decisions, not able to, live up to their own, responsibilities or what they say they're going to do. And then on your side, your interference is a different type of interference. Your ability to manage these people or your belief about your ability to manage these people becomes your biggest interference. When I talk about this is, if a person was to flip-flop and you know how to manage them and corner them, would you feel that is an interference?
Yes, because I'm still irritated by it.
Okay, so that's the interference.
Yeah, so that comes back to So that comes back to, so personally, we have some conversations about managing people in our past, right? And that actually reminds me, one of the things that probably is an interference, internal locus of control, is my expectations of people, right? That I expect leaders to be of a certain caliber.
Never gonna happen. Sorry, keep going.
So because of that, I think it's my expectation of other people to not flip-flop and to have certain caliber of leading that irritates me, right? So
Yes.
the flip-flop is one, but it's my expectation of them not to flip-flop, my expectation of them to behave in a certain way that irritates me. So if I were to then condense it one level down, my interferences then is my expectation of other people.
Correct. It has to be a very precise one. You cannot just broaden it and look at the root problem.
So I think that's where the fun part about this interference concept is. Interference can be seen on multiple levels, right? We can see it as other people or society at large, or like there are people who are going like, yeah, COVID's problem, it's all COVID's fault. There are people who say that they view that COVID is the interference to their lives.
That's true.
Yeah. And then there are people who feel that their parents, even if they're not around, are the biggest interference in their life. Or PAP is or this person is that person is these are all my interference. So this is also back to locus of control. The concept of interference is where you place your locus of control. What controls you, your actions, your thoughts, and your behaviors. Interferences are basically what controls your mind. So the reason why I was laughing about today is because literally I had so much struggle yesterday because, okay, so one of my biggest interferences beyond the trying to save everybody, that's my old typical habit where I overdo things. One of the so my 7 plus my 2 in my Enneagram, which is another long story, is that I'm too overly optimistic and I like to save people. So put together equals I save all the wrong people. So so that was a lot of me in the past. Still sometimes happens, but then I hold myself back already. So it admitting to that, right? And recognizing my interferences, for example, when I doubt my doubt. Or noticing when I'm trying to help the other person. And then when I recognize that I'm burning out, but I'm interfering with myself, telling myself I'm burning out, those are the processes that are interferences, particularly for me, that I notice for myself. So I used to blame other people for taking away too much, for betraying me, for hurting me. But I also have to recognize that I'm usually overloading myself, usually helping too many people, usually doing too much for people who will not be grateful, even when I know they won't be grateful. And I'll blame them for it. And I'll feel that they are my interferences. So we talk about this on the multiple levels because what we start with is wherever you start with, it's okay. Whether you blame the government, God, your friends, your enemies, it's okay. Start there. Identifying interference starts with what you think the problem is. So every time we deal with any problems, right, it's okay that we attribute blame to that thing first. Why? Because that's your first interference in your mind that you will fixate on.
It's kind of like the thread that you can pull on to get to the root, right?
Yes.
So you kind of start there. If you don't start there, then you might not even get to the root.
If I don't negate my own interference, which means no, I cannot think this way about people who flip-flop, or I cannot think about authority in this way, cannot. But what happens is that I'll start fixating on the idea over and over again, and it will become a real full-on interference. What happened? Yeah.
That comes back to what we spoke about shadow self, right? The part of being aware of who you are, where you are, accepting it first, then you can start to unravel it. Because the moment we start to push it out of our consciousness, it goes subconscious, you become unaware of it, and it becomes a lot harder to deal with, that level of interference when we talk about like shadow selves and stuff.
Yep. And so like the funniest part about this is I did Tom, The Office Matters, for 1 whole year plus before I finally hit a point yesterday where it all clicked. And mind you, I'm not even doing The Office Matters right now as my main focus, right? We're just focusing on this, right? So It was funny because it all clicked as to how this interference is formed. So, I mean, I told you guys about this. Shadow self starts from childhood. It comes from the behaviors and whatever, right? So interferences are the shoulds, shouldn'ts, or like those kind of things in terms of the blame attribution. So expectations is should, right? It's also the shouldn't. Leaders should be like this. Leaders shouldn't be like this. I should be like this. I shouldn't be like this. These are the major interferences that gives control over to a rules-based approach. So once I stick to one rule that does not change in context, for example, I like to use this example because it's always really funny. So when a creepy guy gives a girl flowers versus a good-looking guy gives a girl flowers, what's the difference in response?
That reminds me of Faith talking about, looking at someone and get triggered. Sorry, Faith. One look at this person and get triggered, right? So imagine the two different people giving you flowers.
So there's this difference in response. Context changes. But what happens is that if you think that you need to entertain every single one of them, you're going to go into struggles with yourself. You might feel that this person is a threat, but you go like, I need to be accepting and nice to somebody who treats me nice. Right? So that's an interference, right? So that's a... yes, Ellie?
I think on this type of interpersonal relationship, it's very emotional taxing. Yeah.
Yes.
And it can be interference in how you deal with people on the day-to-day. You don't know if you were to trust them based on their merits or based on what they say. So it can actually interfere your thinking at the same time.
Absolutely. And then there's the term called gaslighters, right? Gaslighters,
Yes.
the people who make you doubt yourself. Yeah, if you trust them, then what happens?
Wow. You are so gonna get screwed.
Yes.
But you see, if you have actually empathy and possibility, all this, right? It's very hard to come to terms even with you identify
Yes.
your interference. So
Right.
Yeah. So you identify the interference that is external, then you start interfering with your interference.
yeah,
It becomes like a...
yeah, that's why.
So for usually, like I think Faith also, we share empathy and Alex also. Usually we try to listen first and then digest, like put it aside and digest for a bit and decide what if it works for us and if we choose to believe or is it part of the interference and how do we move on hence after.
Ellie, you see, because you also share connectedness with me, right? So connectedness, you would understand why they're thinking the way they do, which makes you want to
Correct.
empathy towards it, yet you want to restore. That kind of thing.
So you try to, for us is we are trying to balancing the worst of the best. If
Which
we
is
have,
not easy.
if possible, if no, then we should just accept the outcome as it is.
Yeah, and it's interesting because someone with empathy. Okay, so empathy talent team definition is that you kind of intuitively know what other people are feeling, right? As a talent, right? Like I kind of okay, this person is probably feeling this way. How I'm not very sure. I kind of feel it, and they sometimes right, but the pattern for someone with empathy is that they will look out for how people are feeling, right? So the downfall of empathy also is that sometimes we are not very able to separate what is the other person's feelings and what is our own feelings because they kind of mesh. And when that happens, we have interference, major interference, right? Because we can no longer separate. And therefore, for someone with empathy, it's important for us to be able to kind of know like, okay, I'm kind of feeling this way, but it's not really my feeling. I think I'm getting it from that person. Kids get this a lot, right? Ethan, you're correct. So kids kind of mirror the parents' fear, right? Even or things without knowing why something needs to be afraid, and then they feel it, and it kind of passes on to them. So for us with empathy, we kind of still feel that, and if you're not able to separate the two, right? Your feelings, my feelings, and I'm very clear about what is my feelings. It can become a very big interference, right? And I guess for people with connectedness, might be a little bit harder to disconnect.
So for this connectedness thing, right, it really depends on the situation. So if we are too imposing too much on ourselves and we kind of disregard our actual priorities, then it is the real interference in your focus on what you need to do.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
of course the connectedness, it plays some feeling of the gaps in between of things that is unknown. But once we get to know all the information and data, then we were able to analyze what needs to be done and what we choose to believe and what kind of outcome we are looking for. So it really depends on individual actually.
I love how you guys are talking about this, because you know what's really interesting? There's a little bit of an interference here in the what you should actually be doing. There's this should. I should be nice to people. I should be able to decide rationally. I'm just saying this on the grounds of there are plenty of people who just ignore it, right? I just say, no, I just don't let this person go, right? So there's a lot of, to begin with, your strengths in empathy can become your interference. And then because of the interference, you add on a few more interference of what I should be able to do on top of that, and which is not bad, which is again, like, it's your coping systems of how do you manage the fact that your interference is, I immediately want to be thinking the best of that person, or I see how this person could be or how that person will be, and therefore I want to help the person, but then I had to step back and rationalize everything before I can go back in. These are actually interestingly enough interferences. Not that they're bad.
So interesting, Ethan. I suppose then every strength has a flip side to it, right? Because every strength comes with a form of judgment that we make, which gives us our strength, right?
Yes.
But sometimes we might flip over to the side where we are not willing to accept other people's point of view. So that becomes the interference, because then you will have feelings of frustration, which most of us would have.
Yes.
Or all other forms of feeling of pressure and negative experience.
Yes.
And that ties directly to what Ethan mentioned about expectations, right? So people with empathy kind of expect other people to be sensitive to feelings generally, right? People with positivity kind of expect people to not be wet blanket so much, right? People with, who else do I have there?
Ideation.
Who has... You, okay.
My ideation, my super
people
ideation.
with ideation kind of expect people to be open to new ideas instead of sticking to old ways all the time. People with...
That's a false belief.
It's really irritating for people that... I'm going to try to go one by one as much as I can, right? So for responsibility, people tend to expect other people to take equal responsibility or take equal ownership to what they say they will do. And people with activator kind of expect people to get moving as soon as possible, right? They're like, don't sit on your butt.
Move lah.
So if we just very clearly tie down what our talent teams are, it does tell us, like, what do we naturally, based on our talent teams, expect of other people and of ourselves, right? So that kind of helps us, but it also interferes if we are not able to manage it well.
Yep, I see Ellie wanted to speak.
I think depends on your team also. So sometimes we understand that we cannot conform to each other's standards. I mean, this is the first expectation from myself. I know that there are certain people of the, like, maybe colleagues, they cannot meet my standards. But you have to know how to work around with them. That's the second thing that makes you don't feel that imposed on yourself. You just get your day, do what you need to, and then we move on.
Listen to the amount of pain your voice has when you say, I have to accept that they cannot live up to my standard. I'm exaggerating.
Sorry, just to share with you guys, something happened today because I'm still working from home. So apparently, DHL, they cleared the customs, right?
Yeah.
So apparently they didn't even check the documents, and then they just deliver the stuff to our customer. So apparently they need to pay the GST. So delivery man go and chase GST from customer. So guess what? They reject the thing. So after all the conversation, half an hour with DHL, so I found out the issue because the shipper, which is our headquarters that prepares our document, they submit the wrong commercial invoice. So you see there are two interferences. One is from the shipper. One is from DHL. They didn't even bother to check. So end up it's imposing on my answering to customer, hey, there's parcel delays and stuff like that. So you can hear the pain now.
No,
so you have to know how to move on, you see.
Absolutely. And this is where it's like, but okay, in the world of logistics, how often does, for the lack of better description, really crappy things happen?
All the time. It's beyond your imagination, to be honest.
I know that because I dealt with logistics for a while. I tried to ship things and it was 撞墙.
Horrible.
Okay, it's you want to smack in against the wall. There's a reason why I never enter logistics, and I could never enter logistics because of all these kind of different things. The delays in shipments, the taxation, the clear customs, all these kind of different things.
Correct. Yeah.
The number of things that have to go right just for an order to reach at the right time.
So imagine you are ordering from like Lazada, Shopee, Amazon, especially it's overseas shipment and stuff like that. So these are all the complications that comes in.
Yes.
Yeah, and of course it's related back to compliance, which I believe Melissa is very well versed in. So every processes is very aided if you are in this point of view, especially when it comes to audits. So that's when we start to do something, we ask a lot of questions and people don't like it at all. So that is where the strength becomes the flip side.
Yes.
Because people hate being asked questions.
I think this is where the interesting part about this is, right? There's external so there's external interferences regardless. There's always the internal interference that deals with the external interference. So what I mean by this, right, is I'm trying to get from point A to point B. Everybody else in the middle is interference. But there's an internal locus interference that I can deal with.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, like getting stoned everywhere, son. Yeah.
Yeah. So like for example, right? Like you're trying to get from point A to point B, there's a bunch of people in the way. You can either recognize that this would naturally happen and you always get stoned because of the nature of the job.
Yes.
Right? Which means like, for example, if I was an auditor or I was auditor who's always going down to forensics level, right? What are the chances my clients would like me?
Oh, they're gonna hate you.
They're gonna find fault. They are gonna be unhappy whenever you appear because you're the bringer of doom, right? So or the bringer of fines and everything else. So this is interesting, right? The moment you accept that that is your position, have you seen people who are happy in their position?
Yes and no.
I've met some people who are happy in their position because they're like it's your problem lah. It's your problem. You're unhappy because I'm here to do my job and I'm here to do my part. So that's the lack of internal interference dealing with the external situation. So there's external interference and then there's internal interference.
There's also the element, the internal interference is kind of our expectations and our response to it, right? So as you were sharing, this story came to mind, right? About how I can't remember the exact story. So I think the kid, probably like 3-5-year-old kid, spilled this entire bottle of milk on the floor. Right? So one mother went and like scolded the kid, go clean up. Now look at what you did, spoiled my day kind of thing. The other one went like, well, it's spilled, let's have some fun. They went to like swim in the milk and everything, and then after that they started cleaning it up. They learned about cleaning up messes and the day was done. They had fun in playing in spilled milk, clean it up.
Just crying over spilled milk.
Yeah, instead of crying, literal metaphor. And actually had enjoyed the mistake of the kid. So exact same situation, spilled milk, different response entirely, resulting in different outcome and well-being and happiness, right, so to speak. So
interestingly, I think I hear what Alex is saying. So I see more of it in this way lah. So when the event happened, it is neutral, right? It just happened to be that, like Ethan's example, right? Bad auditor who came by, but bad itself is a judgment of the auditor. But it's just an auditor showed up, did something. But the moment I start to have the experience and I create a meaning out of it, and I associate it with it's really a bad auditor. The next time when I work with the auditor again, I have the impression that the auditor is bad. So that becomes an interference now because you already create an interference inside your head about the person. So rather than what the person is a thought about that person.
Yep.
So that's the thought is the interference, not the person itself.
Yes, and that exactly is it, right? There's the difference between the external interference. That means there are things blocking your way, there are obstacles, true, right? There are plenty of people out there who are going to be in the way of you getting to where you want to go, right? Like Alex, you're asking me, right? Like, because talking to media people, right? Like, I've asked a number of media, like a number of them just basically told me no or not interested. I mean, I have a couple of them who say, send me the articles I'm interested to see. I could take this as a rejection. I could take this as they are getting in my way, or they don't appreciate cybersecurity awareness. I could. The other angle about this is they're not interested. They are not aware of it. And that's okay, because once I find the people who are aware of it, I can move forward. That's the difference between like finding the external interferences and adding on your internal interference versus identifying the external interference and keeping it there. And potential minus interference for most people, or Jeffers' way of describing it, for most people, it is today it is mostly internal interference. There is external interference. For example, in poll voting, there's an American poll voter who literally, her poll vote broke as she was going up. So she injured herself. That's an external one. She cannot do anything about it, right? That's a clear interference. Her disappointment in herself, internal spaced interference. Nothing wrong with it. It's just what it is, right? So there is the external interference. Still, the poll vote broke. Doesn't take away from the reality. There's still the things that happen. External interference are what is. Does that make sense? Like the person doesn't like you. Full stop.
Yeah. Though I must say the impact of the internal one is the one that creates a lot more problems lah. Because if I had just stopped there, then no, I wouldn't think about it further, right? But if I start to attribute it, so self-doubt also happens that way, right? And I mentioned self-doubt, right? The moment like, oh, the task I did, it didn't went as expected, right? Expectation. Then I start to focus on myself and beat myself up. Now, then it worsens, right? Because now the internal interference sort of amplifies the whole thing, and you feel really sucky about it.
Yes.
And you perform even worse after that.
Your your external interference affects you now. Your internal interference affects you in the future. That's the thing.
Yeah, and I was just looking back at the conversation so far, right? So we moved from different types of interferences. That there's one that's external, that's internal. And even if we started from external, we trace back, it probably comes back to internal. And I also want to tie back to our session 2 weeks ago when we spoke about the difference between when we perform well versus when we don't, is when we are focused on a task, we tend to bring about greater performance, right? So we focus on, okay, this is how we do it, this our next step and things like that. When we tend to interfere is when we start to focus on ourselves. It's like, oh, I look bad in front of people, oh, I'm so stupid, or I'm whatever, right? So there's that type of interference, which is not just the internal locus of control, but also the direction of focus, I guess.
Absolutely. So when you think that the thing that's controlling you is the external interference, it will be that will be your focus, the interference itself. Not, this is a hurdle for me to get past to get to my objectives.
No, but I mean, there are people who are very focused on tasks, even though they have interference, it's still fine, right? So Ellie could be looking at all the hiccups in the delivery and still be like, okay, I know how to deal with this, right? Call the right people, settle the thing. It takes longer than usual, but performance-wise,
so this is the part where I just want to sound out, right? There's also the part where the amount of stress it gives you, the amount of happiness. Okay, so people are generally unhappy at their jobs because they're doing it unhappily. Due to the internal interferences that happens, regardless of the external, I mean, regardless or because of the external circumstances, but it is definitely the internal interferences that causes more unhappiness.
Right. So when we talk about internal interference, then we also tie down to there are a few things, right? One is expectations of ourselves, expectations of other people, right?
Or even reality, right? I want a parking lot. It bloody gave me a parking lot.
So expectations, really big piece of our internal one. The other one would be our direction of focus, whether we focus on ourselves or focus on the completion of the task. What other areas of
So again, right? Let's go back to the core of interference. Is the should have, would have, could have, if all the conditionals of if this was not in my way, I would have succeeded. Like these are the should have, would have, could have, different types of interferences. We're very focused. Okay, so the reason why we're not talking about more types is the layers that we're looking at. So again, I use myself as an example. When I feel iffy about somebody who helped me, I feel guilty about feeling bad about that person. So layer one, interference. Okay. Then I second layer interference and go, I cannot feel like this because I shouldn't be such a person. And therefore that I overdo it and help the other person. And then I go too far and interfere with my own ability to assess how much I'm giving and whether this is a logical process. And these are the interferences that also are the double layers that is very interesting. So some of the things that we love or the things that our strengths are is actually the double of two interferences at the same time. So for example, a lot of people have empathy as a thing that is in their strengths. That I know a lot of people who have that usually have parents who are powerful emotional blackmailers.
Maybe it's there.
So the thing is that it is because you doubled back. So you are unhappy with something, your parent makes you feel guilty for feeling bad, so you suck it in and you have to go empathize with your parent. So this is the typical emotional blackmail cycle of a kid with high empathy. And then it creates this whole thing where you're like, I cannot feel bad about my parent even if they hurt me. And this is a very common reason. Not everybody is like this for empathy, but it's a very common thing I see in people with high empathy.
When you are in the age of
0 to 7.
Perhaps, teenage years between, say, 16 to 25, you will still feel that way, but after 25, not so much.
So
because by then you already have a clear definition of what is emotional blackmailing, even for your own parents or even people from around you.
Yes, absolutely. But okay, so I just want to hold it there, right? Like the thing is that we get, okay, so what is interesting is that there's two ways of managing interferences. There's adding new interferences on top of the old interferences. And then there's the letting go of the old interferences. So that's what we were talking about with the shadow self previously. So when we look at it, right, it's, for example, I sense danger, but I feel like empathizing with the person, but then, right? Then I have to take time away and rationalize the whole process. And then this lengthens my process of recognizing that the person is a creep. For example, rather than trusting my first instinct that says, I feel like this person is a creep, can I test it out? So this is the interesting part, right? Because once you're in the emotional tussle, immediately you see your energy drop, you see your emotional balance kind of get tipped over. Even if you make a good rational decision at the end, which is great, you still suffer from that process of the interferences in the middle that takes time, energy, and mental space from you. Which is what I'm also referring to today as to why the internal interferences are something that we need to accept first.
So Ethan, I'm hearing a lot of the, kind of where our interferences come from. Of course, our talent teams do reflect that. A lot of it come from, I believe there's of course, there's a nature component and there's the nurture component from our imprint period, from our parents, things like that, right? So I was wondering whether we could move maybe one step further, which is dealing with interferences, right? So we kind of know we kind of have that, these expectations and things like that. What do we do with it? So, okay, I have this interference.
So first up is, let's identify as whether is this external interference that you're looking at first. So let's start with that. Are you starting with external or internal first? Usually, if you're angry at somebody, usually it's external, right? Okay, so let's start there. Let's start that using the example external. Once you blame somebody or you feel that the person is your interference, this is where we go back to the journaling or venting or renting and get it out of the system first. Blame the person all you want. Accept your interference. Because this person is interfering with everything. The biggest blockade from you getting past your interference is if you feel that you shouldn't have the interference. That this person shouldn't exist. I shouldn't be dealing with this person. I shouldn't feel this way about the person. All these shouldn'ts on top of that first level interference is the reason why this interference stays. Yes, Ellie?
Sorry, I have a question. So when you talk about this interference because of dealing with people, so if let's say you are someone that's managing a few people below you, but you don't have a choice, you see, of the people that you have to manage.
Yes.
So how do you even put this interference, or to...
Let this interference go, right? For example.
Yeah.
So it's fully accepting these people as they are, that they are going to be that level and they're going to do it that way and they have that kind of mentality 100% and work with that level. And this is hard to achieve most of the time when you have high self standards, where you put yourself on, you need to perform at a certain level because that's why you're a manager, that's why you're in a position where you're able to take more responsibility than these people usually, right? So the thing about this is that accepting that not everybody is going to perform at your level, or nobody, or even saying this, nobody will perform at your level as the norm. So even expecting them to screw up, expecting them to make the same mistake, even if you tell them 2,000 times, expecting all these different things is part of the thing. Because what happens is that very often when we're expecting somebody to already, like for example, one of the interesting conversations I had, okay, so this is a client for The Office Matters. I had a conversation with the boss and the manager below him. The boss is always complaining about the manager below him because he's not doing it as he expects. And then I talked to the manager below him, and then what I'm realizing is that the manager is doing everything just not the way that the boss wants. But there's no communication between the two. And what happens is that the work is being done just not the way the boss wants, but everything's still being done. So there's those kind of communication issues that happens very often. Then when I set it down and I realized that the boss never communicated what he wanted to the staff. And then therefore it became like I expected you to be able to do this. So his interference, so when we blame the other person, usually there's an interference in us that stops us from getting the person to do what we need them to do because we expect them to perform a certain way. We expect them to understand what we know or to think in a certain manner that we think that they should. Or there is something about them that triggers the hell out of us and we don't know what it is. And therefore, I don't want to engage the person on the level to be empathetic with, not necessarily empathetic, but like even understand whether he has the capacity to understand what I tell him. So there are all these questions that are in mind now.
And actually, one of the things, just thinking in my head, right, when we talk about external interferences, especially when it deals with people, my favorite psychologist comes to mind, right? Dr. Henry Clark on boundaries. So I think a lot of times when we deal with other people, there's the need to try to control them. Right? We kind of expect people to behave in a certain way and try to make them behave in a certain way. And I think the moment we do that, we kind of cross a boundary because we can never control other people, we can only control ourselves. And I think to me, when we start looking at external interferences, that drawing of boundary of who that person is and what they can control and who you are and what you can control becomes very important. So for me, my own growth has been like, the moment I start to recognize that even statements like, he makes me angry is a violation of boundaries, right? Because I'm responsible for my feelings. So when I start to recognize these boundary violations, it's a lot easier for me to then manage these interferences because the locus of control now, how do I put it? It's now within my locus of control, right? I can manage my reaction. I can manage how I feel. The moment I recognize that that guy who makes me angry is not responsible for me making me angry. I am responsible for me making me angry at his response, right? So that's, I mean, I guess in some ways it comes back to turning the locus of control inwards. But for me, when we start talking about the external locus, the external locus of control, when it's external to us, always brings me back to the concept of boundaries, right? Which is like my feelings. You make me feel angry, but it's me. So I'm responsible for my feelings.
Yep.
So Alex, Ethan, can I add?
Yeah, of course.
I just want to cycle a bit back because what I find what Alex talked about boundaries is more of actually internal interference because you draw imaginary boundaries anyway. So boundaries are not physically out there. is what exists inside your head lah. But what I wanted to allude to is to expand on what Ethan covered on external versus internal interference, right? So I would usually call it the difference between a thought problem versus a reality problem. So a reality problem is if I sit there long enough, something serious will really happen if I don't do anything about it. But a thought problem, usually if I sit there long enough, nothing really happens except I feel really bad about it. Right. And most of the things we do at work does mesh both of it together because we do need to do certain things, but often we can't separate where is the thought and where is the real problem. That's where we feel really bad about ourselves or about other people.
Perfect.
Yeah, so that's just a quick way. So I thought what Alex then later on covered about boundaries is some sort of a reframing, because if it's a thought problem, usually what we do is we reframe, right? We do rather than a negative self-talk, we do a positive reframe, like saying things like, oh, it's not really them, it's really maybe we did our best effort and it just didn't work out. That's a reframe. I just reframe it into an environmental outcome rather than a belief about myself as a lousy, worthless piece of shit, right? So I would reframe it that way lah. So that's how I see it.
But I think the boundaries part is a little bit more than a reframe. So it does kind of reframe the problem, if that's what you're talking about, right? From it's about me rather than that person. But it doesn't kind of reframe that I'm angry. I'm still angry, right? It doesn't make me like, I'm not angry. I'm thinking this person is
So let me extend the language a little bit more, because if I go back to power, the person has the power to make me angry when you don't draw the boundary. The person has the power. I am giving you the power and therefore the ability to interfere with me. Therefore, you are my external interference. Versus, I feel like this person is my interference, which is a different language when we split up the parts. Then after that, I look at my feelings about it being an interference or my feeling of interference.
Which puts the responsibility squarely in your own court, right?
And therefore the locus of control in your own court.
Yes. And I think that's where we're doing. So it's not to kind of reframe things and say things are okay when they're not, but kind of accepting that, crap, I'm bloody pissed off right now, but it's mine. It's like, if I put it on the other person, that person makes me damn angry. What am I going to do? Either if I'm in power, I could fire that person, or I could get crazy and kill the person. Sometimes,
but you could fire the next 10 other people because you never dealt with the issue at hand.
Yeah, right. So the moment I look at it and say, hey, look, so I know I'm bloody pissed off, I'm angry. Why am I angry? Right? So because this person didn't do this. Then of course, like what Ethan said earlier, we start coming back to so what am I expecting of this person? What am I expecting of myself? Is it realistic? And if like what Ethan says, right, I should start expecting people to make mistakes and start expecting people to be stupid and stuff like that, then I'll be less pissed off and things like that. So I do see kind of all these things connecting as we talked about it, the expectation, the boundaries piece, the locus of control, bringing it in, and then of course the responsibility. And the other thing, Ethan, maybe you want to elaborate, right? I remember we spoke about it, and this thing about giving power to the other person also attributes the responsibility to the other person.
Yeah. So right? So the word power, right, is the ability to control. So if somebody has the ability to affect your mood, they have power over you. They have the ability to make you interfere with yourself. They have the ability to interfere with you, which then throws you off from doing what you need to do. So I go back to the why doing things unhappy doesn't help you. It's because you're giving power to the other person to affect your mood. And your mood then affects your work and your actions and your behavior and your thoughts.
And we kind of go off a little bit on a tangent, right? Because I kind of like that concept, Ethan, the last time we spoke about it, that when we kind of give people power over you, you also then give them the, I guess, undue burden of that responsibility, right?
Yes.
So that can also change the dynamics of that relationship of people? Talk a little bit about that.
Particularly, okay, when we talk about this, right, we also talk about, okay, so it depends on what kind of relationship. If it's an antagonistic relationship, it is different versus a guilt trip based relationship, which is entanglement or enmeshment, right? Enmeshment is where you have power over my emotions, but I also have power over your emotions. And therefore, when you trigger my emotions, I'll trigger your emotions. And
So
vice
that's
versa.
like in the enmeshment kind of context, you're talking about like parent-child, spouse, family member kind of relationship, right?
Yes, even at workplace, right? Because if you're working very closely with somebody and you have really good relationship with the person at first, and then suddenly one argument comes up, and then you start having like, what's wrong with you? And then you start feeling this sourness, but you still want to maintain the friendship. But then the back and forth, that kind of thing is also enmeshment. It's just how long it lasts for, like how willing you are to cut the relationship. So enmeshment and everything is when you give power, both parties have power to affect each other and misusing it by accident. Usually by accident, I view it as by accident, meaning because most people don't know how they affect other people. They're usually focusing on how they feel. And that's their interference from being able to have a better relationship.
Yeah, and from a parent perspective, right? Because we kind of talked about it, it becomes like if the parent goes to the child and say, "You make me so angry," it's like suddenly the child has the responsibility of making the parent happy,
Yes.
right? And
because the child is affected by the parent and the parent is affected by the child, the back and forth becomes enmeshment.
Right. So then that actually the dynamics of attributing power to the other person over your emotions have that kind of almost negative. It is negative, right? Negative impact on the relationship.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about the non-enmeshment relationship, the antagonistic one. How does it work?
So it's very simple, right? The typical antagonistic relationship is one person just goes up to the other person and and then the other person, like if I was in an antagonistic relationship with you, for example, Alex, and I tell you that you piss me off. In a typical antagonistic relationship, if there is no bond between the two of us, you walk off. Or you tell me to just screw off and go eat whatever. If I have no power over you, there's no relations, right? So you can just go screw off. You have no effect on me. Only when we expect something out of the other person, or we have given the person some kind of power to affect us when they're angry, can that enmeshment and escalate and go to the next level.
Right. So that comes back to my concept of boundaries, right? So when there's antagonistic, the boundary is there, I don't bloody care, so I can walk off. But when there's enmeshment, the boundary has been crossed, right? So then too bad, we can't have that.
There's no boundaries. One person might have their own boundaries and the other person might cross the boundaries, but this person might just go, okay, never mind, bye. But there's the one person who still crosses the boundaries and tries to throw blame onto everybody else.
Yep.
So this is what we term as interference internally, where your internal interference then can either attribute blame to other people or attribute blame to yourself or negate your own clear intuitions about what's happening and doesn't allow you to examine what's the situation. So what happens that then you need to take a break away from everything, take time to be rational, meditate, go through whatever processes, then come back into the picture.
Yep.
Those are interferences. We can remove interferences, but if you're talking about improving your processes, it's about removing your interferences and letting go of them 100%, which means that the next time this thing happens, I do not feel the same interference.
So it's I guess in NLP is about choice, right? You actually have the choice, the ability to choose how you want to respond rather than having an automatic reaction to a trigger.
Absolutely, and that's interference.
There are two ways to do that, right? One is usually, and most people come to terms with it, once people recognize that this is a sort of a thought problem, usually they know it won't affect them anymore. But we must truly recognize, not cognitively know it, but at the heart they don't know it.
Okay. Emotionally accept that this is a thought problem.
Yeah, emotionally accept that it's a thought problem. I mean, it's the whole premise of the whole wellness that's happening now, right? Where people feel very pressured and people now come to talk about it. And once they talk about it, they start to feel, hey, it's okay not to be okay. And the moment they recognize it's okay not to be okay, all the release and all the tension, all the pressure suddenly just went away for that moment.
Yeah, and it's perfectly okay to blame the other person for being a complete imbecile as long as you recognize that you're blaming the person and then take back the power and go, okay, what can I do next?
Yes.
So the starting point, regardless of where you are, is always the acceptance of it, right? Because the moment you, even if let's say I start blaming myself for, oh, I shouldn't think of that person as a problem, I should have an internal locus of control, you kind of interfere with yourself already, right?
Yes, yeah, that's the exact interference. Yeah, but Ellie wanted to say something.
So it reminds me of a previous conflict with one of my department with the sales department colleague, because they are, of course, every company has their own end-to-end processes. So not all people can understand why these processes are in place. Of course, the baseline is the compliance portion.
Yes.
So the thing is, for sales people, they don't really care about compliances, no matter how much you explain to them. So that is the first interference, internal interference, that's first. So if they don't get the kind of result and outcome, so they'll start to point fingers at you, say nasty stuff, etc. So it happens to us, where the sales people kind of like go lambast on us and ignore us for like weeks until, so like for us is, my processes is that I have that patience to, you can kind of talk to me if you want to, but I can ignore you totally. I just do what I need to do and just follow the process and do. So I mean, for our side, it's really clear cut. So
That's
end
called
of the day,
Zen, by the way. That's called Zen.
Exactly. So I mean, I have to guide my two other colleagues. Don't get so worked up. They will talk to you if they need to. So true enough, they kind of like I don't mean to say the sorry thing, etc. So after that, things turn out. By end of the day, they are still like a walking ticking bomb.
I mean,
nonetheless, that problem is solved, but there are still a time ticking bomb where you do not know when they go berserk again.
It will happen again, right? So knowing it will happen again and predicting that will happen, and then going, okay. So this is rather harsh but this is a very honest transaction. Okay, what you term is transaction analysis, right? Parent-child relationship, right? Correct. They want you to be their parent, to give them what they want, because whenever a person throws an anger fit at somebody else, that's effectively a tantrum. Yeah. I think that by throwing a tantrum, you're going to give me what I want because I'm a little spoiled brat. That's basically a lot of the behaviors of this kind of processes that people have. They think that by coercing the other person, they can win. This is when actually the moment your staff, the people you're managing, the moment they can accept that these people are acting like children and imagine them as children, the process changes. Because very often why we react to oppressive or abusive people is probably because we have experienced it in our childhood with our parents losing their temper on us. Maybe once or twice, not that often, but once it happens, it imprints upon us that parents are allowed to be children and we are supposed to take it. And we're supposed to give in to them. And that's what a lot of children, while they're growing up, even if their parents are well-meaning, might end up doing such behaviors that cause those children to think that way in the future. So the reason why a lot of people react to scolders and beration and like, I can't stand it in the army, right? Because they like to scold people. I'm like, for what? Like, my first reaction is, I don't get you.
I think it's to show who is in control kind of thing, right? Like hierarchy kind of. I don't know, I'm not in the army, but it sounds more hierarchical kind of.
Yes, absolutely. And it's their way of it's their way of trying to control other people.
Yeah.
Role play, like recently there was a guy who scolded the person because he told him to put on the mask and he got, I think, I'm not sure whether he got.
The Angmo guy, is it? Some Caucasian.
No. So there's this guy, I think he was an officer handling a bunch of recruits at, I think it was Pasir Ris. Then someone came and said, you put up your mask. And the guy scolded him and he wrote an article. He wrote it on social media. It blew up and gone, right? So why would someone go scold people like that? That's part of the power play.
It is part of the power play. It's okay. If I have no internal locus of control, I'll go out there and find every locus of control I can. Right? So every time I can control other people and other people's behavior, I feel a little bit better about myself. That's the reason why a lot of people are power hungry. Their internal interferences stop them from doing what they need to do for themselves and care for themselves. So in order to have a sense of control, they externalize it into other people and start trying to control other people using tantrums and other behaviors and impression upon other people. So if you look at, for example, the way that the guy in X-Men, forgot his name all of a sudden, Magneto, he believes that humans need to be controlled because by their nature, they're evil. That belief system is a reflection of his self. The only reason why I believe that humans are evil is if I feel that I'm evil, which means my interference makes me believe that I'm evil. Therefore, I think that all people need to be controlled because I was controlled and therefore I became a better person. Therefore, everybody needs to be controlled. So they have these logic systems. The same logic system in interferences work in serial killers, mass murderers, and all these kind of things. They think that their way of looking at the world is the right way because it's a shoulda, woulda, coulda.
It's their model of the world, right?
Yeah,
And
so it's
interferences
model of the
stop you
world.
from looking at reality. Yeah, but Jeffers?
Yeah, so I want to go back to your point, which I want to point out that also like Alex's example of the guy who scolded people wearing masks, right? And my connectedness come in, it's temporal, because I don't believe that person would score every time. It's just happened at that moment that it just triggered, or some insecure thinking came in and snapped, right?
He was having
we do it all the time as well. That we don't feel happily excited 100% throughout the day. There are just ups and downs, and that's a matter of fact lah. And during the down moments, we just try to be more silent at times and not to say hurtful things. And during the highs, then of course that's how we express ourselves lah. Likewise, and I think what Ethan pointed out was more about people are just finding different ways to cope based on the model of the world that they have, to the best of their ability.
And so that's why I use the word interference, because the reason why the person went and affected the army people was very simple, because he had his own interference and he needed to exert a certain amount of control over the environment in order for him to feel a sense of control. It's the same as the professor who scolded the Chinese and Indian couple, and then go like, you shouldn't. Yeah. So all these kind of things is their own should have, would have, could have, in their own minds, exerting the control into the world rather than their own minds. And so that's what actually happened. So identifying, so it is okay that you have these thoughts. It is okay that you have these interferences. The reason why we struggle into controlling or managing them is because we feel that we cannot accept it as it is. Like we cannot accept that this is my thought. I cannot accept that this is how the world works. I cannot accept that this is the way things are because should have, would have, could have.
Yeah. So to expand on Ethan's idea is like sometimes when we create a certain expectation, we want to do something to make ourselves feel better, only to realize it doesn't make ourselves feel better. And only when we realize that, oh, we were the one who were creating the expectation in the first place, and let go of the expectation, that's where you get really, really present and you really let go of the pressure on yourself.
Where you're actually able to focus your attention on the task. Yeah. And therefore, this is about removal of interference. So a big part of it then is letting it go of the expectations, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly it, right? So that's why we go back to this, right? Like if there's any way to really summarize this, in my opinion, it's really about the interferences are what we think our actions are coming from most of the time, or the lack of action is coming from. And then, but when we go back down to the core of it, we can find the core of the interferences. And once we accept it and be fully emotionally aware and accepting towards it, you can change the interferences and therefore change your behaviors, your thoughts, and your actions. And that's where it really comes from. Like when you identify your interferences, it's okay that you want to scream and yell at this person. It's okay that you want to throw this person out of the room. It's okay that you feel that this person is your biggest problem in your life right now. And if this person was gone, your life would be so much better. It's okay that you feel this way. Then go further into the interference and go, what is within me that's making me feel this way? What do I think this person should be like? What do I think the situation should be like? What do you think I should be like? And those are the basis in which they create the interferences.
Okay, so just looking at the time, we have 8 minutes left. So I thought this is how we could take it forward. Jeffrey, you can take us through a little bit of the summary of what we've put together on the board, and then we'll go around to ask everybody, what was your biggest takeaway from today's session, right? So Jeffrey, over to you first.
Okay, let me just share. You need to enable participant sharing, Alex.
You're not co-host yet, huh? Okay.
A
There you go.
Okay, let me just my...
step, Alex.
Terrible.
Okay, let me know whether you can see my
Depends
screen.
on whether you can be interfered by me or not.
Can see my screen, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so just in summary, we started talking about what interferes us. So a couple of examples that came up from us, people who flip-flop, what are some negative triggers, preconceived notions expressed by others, self-assurance, and I put second guessing ×2.
More like square, but yeah, I know what you mean.
I'll try to put square, right? Self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and even talk about barriers when we look at talent teams, right? Then we talk about locus of control, they're external, internal, and I thought to expand the idea on interference, where we talk about interference are what controls your mind, and there are internal interference and external interference. So external interference talks about like circumstances, what are the obstacles that are present out there, and even things like injury. And the focus tends to be more present. That means what's happening now. Whereas when you talk about internal, we usually talk about attributed meaning, about thoughts around that meaning, tends to focus on past or future, because it already past is either something that happens in the past or the future. I just captured like direction of focus of the self versus others. Interference is also what controls us, and some of the effects of interference or that how it shows up is blaming others, doing and helping too much to others, over fixating of an idea, having a lot of expectation, and even negate your own intuition, right? Having doubting the way you do things. And usually it bears feelings of frustrations, and you usually feel an emotional tussle, right? And that takes time and energy away from you. And the last thing that Ethan iterated many times is a rule-based. The rules that we form are based on the interference that we have, right? So should, shouldn't, could, couldn't, would, wouldn't, right? I also captured interference are temporal, and later on we also talk a bit about how strengths can become interference. So a couple of examples, right? Like empathy, where you're not able to separate what others are feeling versus what you're feeling. And we talk about responsibility, where we also expect other people to be responsible. So there's a should, right? That is involved. Then I thought lastly, then we cover a lot about some ways to manage interference. I think the key thing that came about was, I'll point out here first, right, is about starting to know what you think the problem is, accepting it for what it is, and it's okay to be not okay, right? That's what we are essentially saying at its core. Then similarly, fully accepting who you are, fully accepting people for who they are, right? And also thought what Ethan shared reminded me of, like, oh, you have high standard as a leader, but low expectations.
I expect everybody to fail, even though I have very high standards.
High standards, yeah. Then a couple of ways, like Alex covered drawing helpful boundaries. Then there was this antagonistic relationship, right? I just noted there.
Yeah.
Also talk about we talked a bit about reframing.
Yeah.
Also recognize whether we are giving power to other people who are affecting us. Recognize whether it's an external or internal interference in the first place, whether is it a thought or reality problem. And lastly, letting go of any expectations to find the peace that we seek. Right, so that's all.
That's Alex's favorite statement, letting go of expectations.
I'm learning to do that. I mean, we all have expectations, right? It's about being aware when you have it, and then consciously letting it go. It's a repetitive process, not a one-time thing.
Next time we should start the session. What do you expect from this session?
we should. I do ask that question, right? What do they hope to take away from the session?
No, it's different when you use the word expect.
True. Okay, so thanks, Jaffer, for taking us through the
Thanks, Jaffer.
I was thinking, okay, so let's go around and kind of share what your biggest takeaway from today's session is. Let's start with Faith.
I think the first thing is to really understand which are the external interference and internal, which are the layers that is within our own control, to know that, to accept that is for internal interference, is all about in the mind. So how we choose to react, and to learn to draw helpful boundaries, and let people be aware of where your boundaries lie, so that to lessen the chance of recurrence of this kind of issues. Yep, that's for
Cool.
Thanks, Faye.
Justin.
Yeah, so I was actually trying to apply this to one of the issues I'm facing right now. So I think for me, it's probably the like thoughts versus reality part. So I kind of recognize that my interference that I'm having now is kind of internal. Yeah, so I think it's very much based on things I experienced in the past. So I think it's also a lot more about me having this like thoughts about these things that happened in the past, even though it may not be the reality right now. So I think it's possibly one of the things that I'll have to explore further and then kind of peel away and see what can I do to like overcome this interference. Yeah.
Okay, nice. Justin, pick the next person.
Ellie?
Me? Okay. So for me, after listening to everybody sharing about the interference, on my own interpretation, there's 2 points. Of course, internal is more to myself. External will be the people I'm dealing with. So I think my next motion about interference is, because to me, interference is about a gap analysis. It's more on the gaps, how to close out the gaps. So my next action is how to extract the interference of 2 people in my group, and what is causing them the gap between their ability, their workload. What is interfering the other person that's not performing that well? Yeah, that's
Oh,
my
that's very
next.
cool. That's
Yeah.
even managing other people's interferences. That's very cool.
Correct. This is what I'm tasked at the moment, and I've done my own extraction. I mean, from, how should I put it, qualitative into quantitative. So I already have the quantitative portion. So I'm going to extract what is the analyze on the interference based on this data.
I have this wonderful idea. How about we do our next session on managing other people's interferences?
Okay, sure.
Actually, this is one of the questions I wanted to ask. How, if anybody has experience in.
It's my
Yeah.
whole career.
Okay.
I mean, me and
Because-
Alex are very into this. Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
even managing each other's interferences sometimes.
So just to share, I shared with Alex previously, I mean over the text. So I just started, start of the year, I started to oversee a team. So
Very cool.
my task is to check, I would say check, to manage the team, and because both people are sharing the same responsibility.
Mm.
So where's the gap between, because both people are not equal in fact. So we have to find out what is the difference for the other person, and to find a correlation as well. Yeah.
Very cool.
So Ethan, Jeffers, next session, managing, we can probably think of a better name. It could be managing other people's interferences, or helping other people resolve.
Realize the interference.
Let's just talk about being a good manager.
Okay,
It's not a very exciting like a coach manager. Like you're both a coach and a manager, because actually most managers should be spending quite a bit of their time coaching their staff in the areas that they need to learn,
Okay,
because you're managing them, right?
sure. So
People developer lah.
Oh yeah, people development manager.
how to be a better people developer? Better?
How to be more convincing. Yeah.
Oh, that's the fun part. Okay, cool. How to,
I think
how to
the
manipulate
part-
humans? Yes.
No, not manipulate human. It's how to convince the point of view where you are trying to bring them to, and also make them to see the whole bigger picture instead of just stuck in your own well kind of thing. So that's what I'm
manipulation.
struggling at this moment.
That is manipulation. So that's the interesting part, right? All psychologists manipulate to help their patients or their clients. All coaches manipulate their clients too.
Influence is a better
I'm
word.
not sure manipulate is a right word for that. It sounds
So-
a bit,
There's a should, what manipulate should be. Sorry.
It comes down to definition. Okay, so we'll lock in the next session to talk about it. We'll give it a title, either managing interferences or how to be a good people manager or how to be a manager.
We'll think about it.
So
Thanks. Thank you.
thanks, Ali. So I'm pretty sure you'll join us for the next session. Melissa,
Yeah.
what about you? Your takeaways?
To acknowledge, to firstly identify and acknowledge the trigger, and then maybe to change the response towards that, like to reframe in a positive manner, and to change the response towards that trigger.
Okay, so it's about dealing with that trigger. Right. Okay, thanks, Melissa. So for me, I think my biggest takeaway was the reminder that when triggers happen, not to be so self-judgmental or self-critical, right? Because especially with empathy, right? I go like, I shouldn't be feeling that way. I shouldn't be feeling angry. I shouldn't be, and it's the expectation myself. And I think that for me is my biggest hindrance or interference most of the time. So I should see. I think if I'm able to accept whatever negative feelings, emotions, responses I have of myself first, and say that it's okay to feel this, it gives me the opportunity to then pull on that thread and then slowly unravel the actual issue. But if I stop myself and would have, should have, could have myself, the moment I feel something, then I'm really putting a huge roadblock to my own growth in this area.
I like the language because I just want to note the language, right? You stop yourself from should and say, if I could, and then this is the result I'll get. So it always goes back to reality, right? It goes back to what you want and how you can get there. Not a should be, is that if I want this result, I do this.
I would say it's an outcome-based approach.
Yes.
Yeah.
So rather than the shoulda, woulda, right? Like you should do it this way versus you want this result. This is one of the ways you can get there. There are many ways, but as long as you get the results, it's okay. Or the outcome.
So like most of the time, we try not to be enforcing or imposing someone to conform our ways. I mean, there are different ways to do things. Yeah. So we will rather be more pragmatic on the outcome approach most of the time.
Yeah.
So at least
especially
people
logistics.
Yeah, you know, people scold you behind, a lot of shits happen. So yeah, we try to avoid that kind of
As long as the work is done, okay, bye.
Yeah.
But if you don't deal with it, then you always have a time bomb, right? To manage.
Oh well, there's too much taking time bombs. I'm so sorry about that, but that's the reality. So we have to manage all these time bombs.
It's part of the being in the business, right?
Yeah, but just chill, Zen.
Yeah. I like Ali what you say is true, right? And even I would add a point to that outcome, right? Whether if we don't achieve the outcome, is it a new expectation then?
There's always a new expectation every day, I would say. So it's really about the outcome that we are sorting after. Yeah, and the kind of standards that we are bringing ourselves to. But anyway, it's a very good session about the interference. I mean, it opens up a lot of train of thoughts, in fact.
Okay, thanks, Ali. Jeffeth, then finally back to Ethan.
Okay, for me, is being very clear about when I should put my full stop. So if I really feel angry, full stop, that's it. There's no other meaning attribute to it for the moment. Recognizing that the feeling will go away over time, or just recognizing the fact that if I'm really stressed out in a moment or having self-doubt, I just get a lot of crazy thinking at that moment. And it's nothing attributed to who I am as a person, so once I recognize that, I put my full stop, I'll forget the rest, or they tend to drift away after that. Then yeah, so just being cognizant of the same fact. Yeah.
I like the way you describe it as put a full stop.
Yeah.
Put a full stop.
Very cool. So maybe to add on to Jeffeth, one of the things that I've been doing a little bit more consciously right now is practicing my EFT, the emotional freedom technique, right? The tapping thing. So like sometimes when I get up, I go like, okay, I'm really upset about this. Then I kind of do that, then also remembering, Ethan, what you mentioned about, like, when we do EFT, we kind of release it, but then we need to point it to a new direction.
Yes.
So I add on affirmations to, like, how things are. I release.
That's nice.
So it's quite cool, actually, to be conscious of it, and doing it actually brings down the anxiety level. So something that, if you're have a conscious interference, might be a useful thing to do, right? It's EFT with 2 steps. One is the releasing part, and then the other part, which is the affirming the direction you want to go part.
It's like setting intention.
Yeah, setting intention, or affirming acceptance of yourself or other people, or in some ways, as a Christian, right? I do affirmations of Bible verses, right? That, God has planned for me. His ways are higher than my ways, and things like that. So I do realize that the for me at least, the meditation on the Bible verses helps me with that direction and that affirmation with EFT. So just kind of a quick tip, right, for those of us who are looking at. I think it's interesting, right? I'm experimenting with it.
But of course, choosing the right verses, not the Timothy's. No, okay.
Yeah, the go kill. No, I think we don't have.
You don't
Rain down fire! Sorry.
Sorry, not a Christian here, so I don't really get what you guys are.
No. So because Timothy is all the rules of, like, do not eat pork or these kind of different things, like the.
Yeah. So I mean, basically it's that we do have there's a part whereby we release the interference or the negative emotions. Then there's a part about giving direction through affirmations, and the affirmations could, I mean, for me as a Christian, I use Bible verses, but it could be as simple as, like, you accept yourself, or that I allow myself to be more accepting or more peaceful, or to focus on different things when this happens, or whatever it is. So kind of rewire yourself, right? Because that's part of the process. So
just go for a walk. That's about it.
Going for walks help too.
To release.
Right?
Yeah, just go for a walk. Go for a hike.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, Singapore is that boring, and I already done the whole island, so I'm not gonna do it again.
Especially now that we can travel.
Yeah. Oh, that's shitty. Yeah.
Okay, so Ethan, over to you, and then we will.
Okay. All right, guys. Okay, so just to wrap up everything, right? So we talked about interference.
And your takeaway and your own takeaway.
Yeah. So from the external to the internal, right? Like, it always goes back to this, where just what I wanted to really drive across, and thankfully it really got across, is accepting where you are. Like, you can blame outside, you can blame inside, you can blame anything, but all these interferences in our minds are usually thought interferences that Jeffeth nicely talked about. When you think it is an external one, when you think it is one, that there is an external one, there might be a problem out there. But when you fixate on it and you keep on thinking about the interference, you're actually stopping yourself from solving problems or getting to the next place. And that's what really we were honing in today. So the boundaries, like taking back your locus of control, all these different ways of which we can bridge the language, use our strengths as a reference as to what are the common interferences we might have. And all these kind of different ways we've talked about today was just, for me, really great ways of understanding this on a deeper level. And I think one of the key parts, I think for me, the key part that I'm really remembering and learning, from this process is, remembering from this process is really the fact that everybody has their own way of dealing with interferences, and everybody has their own sense of what interferences are. And it's very interesting, right? Because the key part for me is that the fun part for me is changing the language, yet still keeping the meaning. So for example, when Alex talks about the boundaries, about it, and then Jeffeth talks about the other ways of looking at it, using NLP and some of the other stuff, it really adds in the flavors to recognize that actually most of the time we're still thinking about the same few things. It's still all interference or not interference, or expectations or standards, or this and that, right? Like, there's so many ways of looking at the same thing. For me, the biggest learning here is always going back to how often are we able to just focus on moving past each barriers, focusing on the objectives or the goals or the outcomes or the results, and be present with the future, present with where we want the future to be, right? Like taking the steps to move towards it rather than imagining a bunch of stuff. And and my favorite statement from Jeffeth is still the full stop, right? Like it's just what it is, full stop, right? There's nothing else to it. And that's beautiful. And that's why I would like to end this session with, a beautiful full stop.
Okay, thanks, Ethan. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We will have our session in 2 weeks' time. In the meantime, do check out the meetup groups for any upcoming events. We do have a talent showcase that's coming and things like that. So I'll see you at our next session. Thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Night. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.